Did you know that we're being exposed to hundreds, if not thousands, of chemicals every day through the air we breathe, the things we put on our skin, the food we eat, the water we drink, and our bodies have to deal with those chemicals in some way. So that's what this episode today is all about. We're going to dive into the science behind how our bodies do deal with those chemicals, those detoxification pathways, and we're going to also talk about some practical ways that we can reduce our exposure to chemicals in the first place and things that we can do to support our bodies going through that process of dealing with the chemicals. I have had a bit of a cold this week, so I do sound a little bit nasally, so sorry about that. Hoping that it's all cleared up. I've got a few podcast interviews lined up later in the week, talking to some really wonderful people, sharing their stories and doing some really interesting work in the thyroid space. So I'm looking forward to introducing you to those special guests over the next couple of months. But for now, enjoy this episode on all things chemicals. Welcome to Let's Talk Thyroid, where we explore different aspects of living a healthy thyroid lifestyle, positively and practically, to help you thrive and not just survive. Join me, Annabelle Bateman, your host, and let's talk thyroid. We are exposed to thousands upon thousands of chemicals on a regular basis, and so I just want to have a chat in today's podcast about chemical exposure and how our bodies deal with those chemicals, how they remove them from our bodies, what happens if they don't get removed, and what we can do to help support our body's natural detoxification pathways. So if you want to take a deep dive into the science, I'm going to put you a couple of links in the show notes. This is my dumbed down version, or trying to interpret what I have discovered is an incredibly complex thing. The body is pretty amazing. So my goal, I guess, is to take what I've learned, try to simplify it and turn it into some practical outworkings for us. So some of the information I'm about to share is applicable to everyone, thyroid condition or not, because we're going to go through the basics of how the body deals with these chemicals. But I'm also going to talk about some special considerations for those of us with thyroid issues, what we need to be extra aware of, and I suppose some specific things that we can do to help support our bodies deal with chemicals. So first of all, just have a bit of a think about where chemicals lurk, because at the end of the podcast, we're going to go through some really practical things that we can do to reduce our exposure to chemicals. But we're exposed to chemicals all day, every day, really. And so when we're looking at managing our thyroid health from a holistic point of view, this sort of detoxing or reducing our toxic load or removing chemicals from our life is part of that lifestyle. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that may not be your top priority to deal with if you're just new in on this thyroid health journey. But it is something to consider. It can be a trigger for autoimmune conditions, autoimmune thyroid like Hashimoto's or Graves'. So it is something that is important to be aware of and even just to be chipping away at over time. Because, look, we're exposed to chemicals in our homes through often our cleaning products, our carpets and furniture apparently have things like fire retardants built into them. Some paints do. We've got chemicals in the food that we eat. We've got chemicals in our water. We've got chemicals in our skincare, our fragrances that we might wear, perfumes, air sprays. And that's not even to mention the things that we get exposed to when we walk outside the door and all the car fumes. And depending on where you live, you might live in country areas where there's lots of pesticides or spray, even crop sprays. You might work in an environment where you're exposed to different chemicals. So it's a bit of a minefield, really. I think the more we are aware of it, the more that we can just take some of those daily actions to reduce our exposure. Because let's face it, we can't remove chemicals from our life, not if we live in industrialized countries, and particularly if we live in the cities or actually even in the countries, because I think often people who live on farms around the country are exposed to chemicals just in a different way. So part of change requires awareness. So just be aware of where we might find some chemicals lurking. But now let's have a chat about how our body deals with chemicals. Now this is pretty sciencey, and I'm not a super sciencey person. This is my simplified version, or my takeaway from listening to and reading and doing a bit of research into how our bodies work. We talk colloquially about detoxing, and I've probably mentioned it before. We talk about going on a detox or our body's detoxing. Now, apparently that's not a very scientific or medical term. The scientific term is biotransformation. And when we're talking about our body detoxing, we're often talking about our liver and to a lesser extent our gut, but both are involved in this sort of chemical transformation process. So most of what I've certainly have thought about as detoxing, and you might too, is apparently called hepatic biotransformation. That is hepatic meaning from the liver. And that is where a large amount of these chemicals are broken down so that they can be dealt with by the body. So when our body is exposed to a chemical, and look, there's different chemicals are responded to differently by our body, but in a general sense, that chemical needs to be broken down into a metabolite in order for our body to get rid of it. And these metabolites are water soluble, and they are gotten rid of or excreted from our body via our urine, our sweat, our feces. And if our body actually can't get rid of it, and there are some chemicals that the body just can't break down and get rid of, then they're stored in our fat cells or in our bones. And I don't know, have you heard the term obesogens? I remember talking with Sharon, she shared her thyroid story quite earlier on in the podcast, and we were talking about obesogens. But obesogens are basically chemicals that make us obese. And I don't know about you, but I don't know, having an underactive thyroid, I deal with struggles with weight enough to not have chemicals making me fatter. So, no, thank you. Let's see what we can do to reduce these obesogens. But also the fact that they're stored in our bones isn't great either. So this is where I guess we've got to look at what we're exposing our body to and then helping our body get rid of the things that it can. Now, when our body converts chemicals into metabolites, there are two phases. And this is, again, fairly simplified because from what I can gather, both phases, particularly phase 2, there's lots of different pathways and depending on the chemical structures that are being broken down. But phase 1 is called oxidation reduction. And this is where the chemical structure changes so that they can go through the phase 2 process. When they're broken down, they can actually become more reactive. And so if our phase 2 pathways aren't working properly, that can cause a problem like oxidative stress, and we can have these free radicals roaming in our body, wreaking havoc and causing illness. And we certainly don't want that. So that is phase 1, is this sort of, was described by Dr. Karatsian as a funnel. So the chemicals come in, go into this funnel, and then they get broken down or they change in structure in phase 1, and then they move on to phase 2. And there are a number of different pathways within the phase 2 process, but the key ones are methylation and sulfuric pathways. There are lots of things that I'm going to come into how we can support these different pathways, but just being aware of them, because you might have heard the term methylation, or you might be aware of, different foods that contain sulfur. So there are different things and different deficiencies that we may have, and particularly those with thyroid issues may have, that are going to make these pathways function less optimally. And so we just need to be aware of these things. In fact, 20 to 25% of people genetically don't have good methylation pathways. And so we'll need some extra support in this process. And I know that's me. I've had a genetic sort of profile done a number of years ago, and I just dug that out again actually just this morning, and it definitely shows in relation to these phase 1 and phase 2 pathways that I've got some genetic vulnerabilities. I know that I've had methylation. I do have methylation issues. I've spent a lot of time and money on supplements to support that. That's something that I work with my doctor with quite closely, although I'm not always conscious that that's what we're doing. But when I look back, I think, yes, there's a lot of support that has happened there to support that methylation process. And I guess in that sense, that detoxification or biotransformation process. Now, once these chemicals have been through these two pathways, that's the phase 1 and the phase 2, then they become metabolites, which means they're water soluble, and then they head for the gallbladder, which produces bile to combine them with the metabolites, and then they can be excreted. If you're like me and you don't have a gallbladder, which again is a pretty common thyroid issue, is that many of us have issues with our gallbladder, gallstones, bile production, all of that, then it's my understanding that really the liver has to work harder in this detoxification process, which means we really want to make sure we're supporting the liver, and also we really want to make sure that we're supporting the gut, because whilst the liver does the heavy lifting, there is some biotransformation processes that go on in the gut as well. So if you don't have a gallbladder, that's a whole other topic really, which I'm not going to go into now. And maybe I should get an expert to come in and talk about gallbladder issues and what to do if you don't have a gallbladder. But certainly my understanding of many, many years now without a gallbladder is that, well, you've got to be careful about eating too many high-fat foods because the gallbladder does help to break down fats, but it means that the liver is going to need that extra support. So that's just a bit of an aside. So that's the way, in very general terms, the way our body deals with chemicals. And if we have trouble eliminating them, then like I said before, we can get fatter. It's not good for our bone health. It can create inflammation. And, those of us with autoimmune issues don't need any more inflammation. We should be trying to reduce inflammation in all that we do. We can end up with free radicals roaming around, wreaking havoc in our bodies. We can have antibody responses, that immune response. And like I mentioned before, chemicals can actually trigger an autoimmune response. So they can actually be one of the root causes of our autoimmune thyroid condition. With all of that having been said, we really need to have healthy pathways for our body to eliminate exposure to chemicals, or the chemicals once we're exposed to them, for our bodies to be healthy. So how can we do that? How can we actually support our bodies in this process? Remember we talked about there's two phases, phase 1 and phase 2. So in terms of phase 1, this was the oxidation reduction phase, and we can support this process with glutathione. Now, glutathione is an antioxidant. That antioxidants help to fight free radicals and deal with oxidative stress. So you might have heard of free radicals, aside from what I mentioned before, and oxidative stress. They're not good for our cells in general terms. So we want to be doing anything that we can to get rid of these free radicals and to not be in a state of oxidative stress. So anything that's a good antioxidant is going to be good in supporting this phase 1 process. So glutathione can be taken as a supplement. It can be enhanced by the use of citrus essential oils. So there's been some studies into mandarin, lemon, orange and tangerine. There's also rosemary and black pepper essential oils can aid in this glutathione production. So I often like to have a drop of, say, lemon essential oil, or I love tangerine actually, in my water bottle. And so that can just be a nice, easy way to incorporate that in my day-to-day and be supporting that glutathione production and that phase 1 detoxification pathway. You always want to make sure that your essential oils you're using, if you're going to use them in that way, are food grade essential oils. Now, other foods that are high in glutathione are lamb, avocado and Brazil nuts. Now, Brazil nuts are also high in selenium, which those with Hashimoto's are often deficient in. So Brazil nuts can be a really just an excellent thing. I think recommendation is about 2 a day for selenium. I'm not so sure dosage for glutathione, but if we can get these things in our natural everyday food sources, then that's fantastic. And it was, if you go back to the episode on menopause and thyroid with Dr. Joni Labe, then she's the one that we talk a bit about the lamb, avocado and Brazil nuts in that episode. Exercise is also really a really good way of creating antioxidants, and apparently that production of antioxidants goes on for some time after we've exercised as well. And often you'll find in supplements glutathione. Certainly when I look at the supplements I take, there is glutathione in there. Milk thistle, also called silymarin, is another supplement that could be used here. Sulfur-rich foods are helpful, so things like garlic and onion, I guess, unless you have an issue with those foods, which I know some people do. Other alpha-lipoic acid, selenium. The other thing I came across just even this morning, actually, in terms of supporting glutathione production in this phase 1 detox, this was a study done into chickens, actually, but it was black seed oil was supportive of increased glutathione. And I think that was specifically in relation to detoxing mold. So you can sort of see that there's quite a few different foods and supplements and natural products that can support this antioxidant production and supporting that phase 1 part of the detoxification process. Now, in terms of phase 2 support, now remember this, there are many different pathways in this phase 2 support, the key ones being methylation and sulfuric pathway. So in terms of that methylation support, and you'll remember I mentioned that many people, about 20 to 25%, actually have some genetic predisposition to issues with that methylation pathway, and hands up, I'm one of them. We are going to need some extra support. And this is something that really, as I've delved into it, really needs to be dealt with a health practitioner. So whether that's a good naturopath or a doctor that understands these pathways, I do think if you've got methylation issues, I think we need to be aware of it and do some research and then get some professional support. But in general terms, we're going to need vitamin B12 and folic acid and some of the other B vitamins as well to help support that methylation pathway. So that's where supplements really are really helpful. I think I've mentioned recently that in the last few months, discovered that I was quite low in vitamin B12, and I've been supplementing specifically with that. You know, this is where we need to test and not just guess, and we need to do some research into those things for ourselves. Here are a few specific things that we can do to support this overall biotransformation process. And we do need to be aware, think of our detoxification organs, or our organs that are processing these chemicals to get them out of our body. So we've got the liver, we've got the gallbladder, we've got the kidneys as well. I'm not going to delve into that. That's not part of what I've been researching right at this point in time. And also the gut. Just bear in mind good gut health, good liver support. If you don't have a gallbladder, be aware of that. If you do have a gallbladder, that, like I said, that's another conversation for another time, but just being aware that these are the organs in our bodies that are doing their best to get rid of the chemicals that we're exposed to so that our body can function healthily. So here are some things that we can do. We can exercise. Now, apparently a sedentary lifestyle is not good. Well, it's not good for lots of reasons, isn't it? But gut motility is one of the issues that comes up with a sedentary lifestyle. And that means that all the things that we're trying to excrete through our intestines and our bowel, our gut motility needs to be good. So that is all the muscles and, how the food gets kind of jiggled along all the tubes. And if we're sedentary, then that does have an impact on gut motility. And we really want to make sure that we are pooing out the things that we need to poo out, because we don't want those chemicals getting stuck. That's, I think, one of the reasons why constipation is not a great thing. We don't want those things that our body's trying to get rid of held in our body for any longer than they really need to be. The other thing that I mentioned before that exercise was good for was increasing our antioxidants. We all need to get out and do a bit of exercise. It also helps us with sweating. So that's the other thing with exercise. Sweat is another one of those ways that we get rid of toxins from our body. And so we want to build up a healthy sweat. I've actually been sick. You can probably hear it in my voice. We've had a cold in our house. And so we've got a sauna. So I've been really trying to sweat it out. I've been in the sauna the last 3 days, just trying to really sweat it out. So sometimes, we've got to remember that sweating actually is part of that getting rid of things in our body. Next is diet. Now, some of the things that we can do in our diet, like I said before, things like, that lamb, avocado, Brazil nuts. We can eat superfoods. So things like our leafy greens and blueberries, those sorts of things. Those superfoods are really great for fighting antioxidants. We can use fermented foods, so like your kimchi or your sauerkraut or your beet kvass, even things like, kombucha. But those fermented things are really great for having a diverse gut microbiome, as well as eating a wide range of fruit and vegetables. So there's some of the things that we can do to support our gut and those pathways in terms of making sure that we're getting enough good quality food. Now, we can take some supplements, like I said before, so things like your B12, some of the other supplements that I came across as being good for this detoxification pathways are things like taurine, which is supporting removal of chemicals like fluoride and insecticides. GABA is also good for clearing out fluoride. There was a mice study that showed that resveratrol is good for restoring thyroid function after exposure to fluoride. And I did a bit of research into the fluoride as one particular chemical, although, we're talking about a variety of chemicals here. And taking a and probiotic can be good for our gut bacteria, and that's, like I said, creating that healthy microbiome, and that helps to support these biotransformation pathways as well. The other obvious practical thing we can do is actually reduce our exposure to chemicals, which I'm going to come to at the end. I just want to have a quick chat about some special considerations for those of us with thyroid issues and chemicals. There are 3 different main ways that chemicals impact Hashimoto's, and this information came from a special Hashimoto's course that I did through the Karatsian Institute last year. So Dr. Karatsian talks about 3 main ways that chemicals impact Hashimoto's. One is some chemicals act as goitrogens, which means that they can actually result in a goiter. 2 is that some chemicals can actually interrupt thyroid signaling pathways. That's where, for example, BPA, which is in plastics, can bind to T3 receptors, and then it competes with T3, which is our active thyroid hormone. So that's where some of these chemicals can be referred to as endocrine disruptors, and you might have heard that terminology before, that some chemicals are endocrine disruptors because they're disrupting the endocrine system within our body, and the thyroid function falls within that endocrine system in the body. And so we don't want to have those thyroid signaling pathways interrupted because, gosh, when we've got thyroid issues, we really want to make sure our thyroid function is as good as it can be. So reducing things like plastics, which I'll get to in a minute, can help, stop that interruption in that thyroid signaling pathway. Third way that chemicals can impact for Hashimoto's is it can promote that autoimmune response. There have been studies on BPAs, pesticides, glyphosates, mercury, lead. They can all create an autoimmune response in the body, and we certainly don't want that. So it is really important to support our liver and our gut for the reasons that we've already talked about, but also because these are the main places that our body converts T4 to T3. And if you're like me and the medication you take is it's synthetic T4, and it then relies on our body to convert that into T3. And most of that conversion is done in the liver and the gut. I'm pretty sure some goes on in the brain too, but I can't remember that. But definitely in the liver and the gut. And so, you can see how this is also intertwined, can't you? But we do need to make sure that those conversion pathways are uninterrupted as well. So the benefit, if we're focusing on reducing chemicals and supporting our chemical biotransformation pathways, is that that's going to help to support that conversion between T4 to T3, or at least make those environments more conducive to good conversion. And it's our T3 that is the active form of our thyroid hormone that actually goes to work in our cells to make our metabolism work and give us energy and all those things that we're wanting to happen. So we really do need to make sure that those processes are as good as they can be. Now, let's get into a few practical things as to how can we actually reduce our chemical exposure. Now, I would say, like I said at the beginning, this takes time. It's not quick. It's not something that we can completely do. Like, we can't completely remove chemicals from our life, but we can be deliberate over time to reduce that exposure and that toxic load. And I guess if you know that you're the sort of person that is highly sensitive to chemicals, then maybe you bump this up on your priority list in terms of the way that you manage your thyroid health. And if you think you're less, you're not so super sensitive to chemicals, then it's not something you can ignore, but it is something that maybe other aspects of managing your thyroid health are a higher priority. So this is where we do need to see all these things as part of a lifestyle. So we've got diet, we've got managing our stress, learning how to unwind, deal with those sort of, that pressures and stress. We've got, detoxing, we've got our mindset, we've got all these different, all these different aspects of managing our thyroid health as part of a lifestyle. And this detoxing is part of it, but it's certainly not the whole. But that's just to give you some context. Think about, I guess, where we're exposed to chemicals and then how we can go about reducing exposure in those areas. And if we think about what we put on and in our bodies, that's probably an easy place to start. So think water. So when we're drinking tap water, there are chemicals in there that's part of that, I guess the cleaning process that when we're drinking water out of the tap, there is chlorine in there, there's fluoride, there's other chemicals. So that might be something that you might want to look at. So drinking filtered water, making sure you're still getting the remineralization, getting minerals in your water as well. So spring water or putting a water filter system in your home that remineralizes the water. But that can be a way to, just reduce that daily constant exposure to small levels of chemicals is to drink clean, pure water. Food. Now think about all the chemicals that we're exposed to in our food. Now, so this is where it is best to buy organic where you can, maybe spray-free food. Now, again, we're not going to completely eliminate chemicals because often there's chemicals in the soil that the food is grown in, and that's a whole complex issue. But, when we're talking about just reducing exposure, we can, if we can't afford to buy organic or spray-free, then even just, there's the whole thing about the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. So you can Google that for your country and you'll see, these are the certain fruits and vegetables that really, if you can really buy these, the Dirty Dozen organic and the Clean 15, sort of less concern over that. You can also wash your fruit and vegetables. So you can fill up the water, your sink, and you could put, you can buy some sort of food washers. You could often just put a drop or two of lemon essential oil in the water, and you can wash your fruit and vegetables that way. So there's all sorts of ways that we can, reduce those chemicals. I guess from a food perspective, the more fresh food, fruit and vegetables and food that we're eating, the better, because the more packaged food and processed food and drinks, obviously lots of chemicals in drinks, that they're the things that I guess they're the obvious things to remove first. Then we've got even in terms of food, what we store our food in and what we eat our food from. So this is where removing plastics is really important. And actually, Dr. Karatsian says that removing BPA and the BPBs and, basically removing plastics from your life is as important as removing gluten. And I don't know about you, but I've made removing gluten from my life a very deliberate thing for a long time now, but the plastics I haven't seen as much of an issue until I took this course last year and was really educated as to how significant that chemical exposure in plastics really is. So if you're drinking your coffee from a takeaway cup and sipping it through the plastic lid and you're doing that every day, you're getting small amounts of BPA exposure. What we want to do is eliminate the food storage in plastics. So last year replaced all of our Tupperware, plastic food storage with glass. Just went to Kmart and bought a whole lot of glass storage. So those sorts of things definitely don't reheat food in plastic, and apparently acidic food in plastic is probably the worst. So things like your tomato sauces, or if you're cooking a tomato-based bolognese, for example, and storing that in plastic, the acid is going to help, I guess, pull chemicals out of the plastic into your food, and then you're going to eat them, and that's not a good thing. So we want to be not drinking from plastic, not eating from plastic. We want to just remove plastic as much as we can from our life. Now, the other thing that we can do is, another main area I think is what we put on our body in terms of personal care products. And this is where, I've read everything from hundreds to thousands of daily chemical exposures for women in particular, but not just women, comes through personal care products. This is actually where I first started, probably about 10 years ago. I started slowly replacing skincare products with more natural versions. So my moisturizers, I used Nude by Nature. I used to use just a straight jojoba oil on my face as a facial oil. Now, over the last few years, I've added some essential oils into that. But for a number of years before that, I was just using straight jojoba oil. So you want to look at those well-marketed personal care products, your face lotions, your face washes, any skincare products. And because if they're the things that we're putting on our body every day, then we're exposing ourselves every day if they're not clean products. So you can go to websites like Think Dirty, and you can actually type in brands and you can see how clean or dirty those particular products that you're using are. But you definitely want to, over time, replace, as something runs out, replace it with something cleaner. I've found often buying things from health food shops is just an easy place to go to find cleaner skincare, makeup, cleaning products, hair products. That's just a simpler place to go than trying to work your way through a supermarket shelf. And there's some really nice, really simple ways that you can look after. Really like a straight jojoba oil or, nice carrier oil on your skin, maybe adding in a couple of essential oils, super easy. It doesn't have to be complicated. Cleaning products is another common switch out, where you can switch really highly toxic for really very clean, and really very easy and really very inexpensive. So I make a surface cleaning spray that I use pretty much everywhere in my house that I make it either one of two ways. One, I either use the On Guard cleaning concentrate from doTERRA, a couple of tablespoons of that in a 500ml glass spray bottle, and top it up with water. Or if you don't have that, you can buy liquid Castile soap from most chemists and health food shops will sell just pure liquid Castile soap. Again, 1 to 2 tablespoons. And then if you want to add a couple of essential oils, you can, or you just want to do that, fill it up with water. There's just soap and water. And that will clean your surfaces without needing lots of harsh chemicals. Look, there's a gazillion other ways that we can reduce our exposure to chemicals, and this conversation could go on for a long time. Actually, what I had thought would be a fairly simple topic to explore has proven to be far more complex than I expected, and really it's probably given me some further avenues to delve into over time, and perhaps bring some experts on to talk about some of these issues in more detail and with a bit more scientific understanding. But hopefully this has given you a bit more insight. It certainly gave me more insight, but hopefully it's given you a bit more insight into just how our body deals with chemicals and why it's actually so important that we do reduce our exposure to them, and we do need to support our body in getting rid of them, because we don't want to end up fat and sick and, issues with our bones and impairing our thyroid health. So they're good reasons to reduce our chemical exposure and support our body's biotransformation pathways, also known as our detoxification pathways, so that we can have good health, feel great, and, just be doing all that we can to support our bodies as best we can. Today's episode is proudly supported by me and the different products that I offer in my business. And one of them that really relates to today's topic is essential oils. I use doTERRA essential oils and many of their products that they sell. Now, if you'd like to get your hands on some, please just head to annabellebateman.com and you'll find the link to essential oils. I'm more than happy to help you find products that are going to suit your needs and budget. And if you're not too sure from the website, then just book a strategy session with me. Or even if you're not interested in essential oils and you want to book a strategy session, that is completely fine. I love talking thyroid health with you. I love just helping people find maybe a starting point or uncover some roadblocks, put all my coaching skills at work and see if I can help you. So whether you want essential oils or not, book a strategy session. You can definitely do that through annabellebateman.com/strategy. I'll look forward to talking with you then and seeing you on the podcast in 2 weeks' time. Have an awesome fortnight, everyone. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Let's Talk Thyroid. I would love it if you would subscribe to the podcast and share it with others that you know with thyroid problems. Let's get the message out there. If you'd like to connect with me further, the best place to do that is via my website, annabellebateman.com. From there, you'll be able to join my Facebook group, book a strategy session with me, download my freebie, and access any show notes for this episode. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
The information presented and discussed in this podcast is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease and should not be used as a substitute for proper advice from a qualified professional.